Hellfire Pass, Thailand-Burma Border, July 1943. As blood-red monsoon rains fell, 35 men vanished along the death railway tracks, their pickaxes and shovels discovered standing upright in the mud, as if their owners had been snatched mid-swing, tools abandoned but pristine while something watched from the jungle darkness. I am the War Maestro, and tonight I bring you a tale of men who thought captivity was their worst nightmare, until they became eternal slaves to the hungry spirits that haunt the cursed ground beneath the railway built on 10,000 corpses. In the sweltering summer of 1943, as Allied forces battled across Europe and the Pacific, another kind of hell unfolded in the dense jungles straddling the Thailand-Burma border. Here, the Imperial Japanese Army forced over 60,000 Allied prisoners of war and 200,000 Asian laborers to construct what would become known as the Death Railway, a 258-mile stretch of track built to supply Japanese forces in Burma. The section called Hellfire Pass earned its name honestly. At night, when torches illuminated the gaunt figures of starving prisoners hacking through solid rock, observers claimed it resembled nothing less than a scene from hell itself. The prisoners, British, Australian, Dutch, and American soldiers captured after the fall of Singapore, worked 18-hour days in suffocating heat, their bodies wasting away from malnutrition, cholera, and malaria. Sergeant Richard Vale of the British Royal Engineers stared at the assignment roster with a mixture of relief and guilt. His name had been crossed out and reassigned from tomorrow's transport detail. 30 of his fellow POWs would make the journey instead, escorted by 5 Japanese guards to retrieve railway spikes from a forward camp. Vale knew the real reason for his reassignment. His expertise was needed for a particularly difficult rock cutting. But still, the momentary reprieve felt like betrayal to his comrades. "You're the lucky one," whispered Corporal James Whitley, his face gaunt and eyes hollow from months of starvation. "That section of track. The men talk about it. Something's not right there." Vale dismissed the comment as camp superstition. In a place where men died by the dozens daily, myths sprouted as quickly as the jungle reclaimed shallow graves. The truth was grim enough without ghost stories. "Just focus on surviving another day," Vale replied, his voice rasping from thirst. That night, the monsoon rains came early, hammering the makeshift POW camp with sheets of water that turned the ground into sucking mud. Vale lay awake on his bamboo platform, listening to the persistent drumming on the thatch roof, wondering if the transport detail would even depart in such conditions. In the darkness, over the rain, he heard the Japanese guards shouting commands. The transport would proceed as scheduled, weather be damned. War waited for no man, and certainly not for rain. Vale turned on his side, a rare pang of hunger keeping him from sleep. In the morning, 30 men would depart into the jungle. Some primitive part of his mind whispered that not all of them would return, a common enough occurrence on the death railway. But something in Whitley's warning lingered, like the persistent whine of a mosquito near his ear. Something's not right there. He would later recall this moment as his last night of relative peace. Before the screams began, before the disappearances, before he understood why the local Thai workers refused to approach certain sections of the railway after sundown, before he learned why the jungle itself seemed to hunger for more than just the bodies of the dead. The transport detail departed at dawn on August 17, 1943, as recorded in the meticulous logs kept by Lieutenant Tanaka of the Imperial Japanese Army's Railway Engineering Division. 30 prisoners, 12 British, 10 Australian, 5 Dutch, and 3 American, accompanied by 5 armed guards, marched into the jungle along the newly laid track. The monsoon had passed overnight, but the air hung thick with humidity, as steam rose from the jungle floor. Sergeant Vale watched them go, noting the faces of men he had lived alongside for months in this green hell. There was Corporal Bennett, a former baker from London, who still managed to maintain a smile despite having lost 30 pounds. Private Wilson, an Australian farmer, who somehow kept his spirits up by constantly talking about his wheat fields back home. Corporal De Vries, a Dutch engineer who had become Vale's closest confidant. The column disappeared around a bend in the newly carved railway bed, swallowed by the verdant wall of jungle. They were due back by sundown. When darkness fell with no sign of the transport detail, Tanaka appeared unconcerned. Rain delay, he noted in his log, a document later recovered by Allied forces. The tracks beyond kilometer marker 105 often wash out during storms. But something felt wrong to Vale. The Japanese guards were agitated, speaking in hushed tones. One of them, a young private who sometimes showed small mercies to the prisoners, made a gesture Vale had seen Thai laborers make, a ward against evil spirits. Vale approached his camp commander, Major Harrison, who had managed to maintain a secret diary, despite Japanese prohibition. "Sir, something's happened to that detail." Harrison regarded Vale with exhausted eyes. "Rockslide, most likely, or cholera. I've seen it take men in hours." "All 35 men? Guards included?" Harrison didn't answer. They both knew the odds. At approximately 2300 hours, the first screams echoed through the camp. Vale jerked awake, certain that someone was being beaten or executed, a common enough occurrence. But these weren't screams of pain. They were screams of absolute terror, distant yet clear enough to raise goose flesh on Vale's arms. They seemed to come from the direction the transport detail had taken. "Did you hear that?" Vale whispered to the man beside him. No response came. Throughout the camp, prisoners and guards alike lay frozen, listening. Some made signs of the cross, others whispered prayers. The screams continued intermittently until dawn. With first light, Lieutenant Tanaka assembled a search party, 10 guards and 5 prisoners with medical training. Vale, with his engineering expertise, was selected. "You will locate missing men," Tanaka ordered. "Equipment must be recovered. Railway construction cannot stop." 10 kilometers down the track they found nothing. No bodies, no equipment, no signs of struggle or accident. Only empty track cutting through the jungle and boot prints that simply stopped in the middle of the path, as if the men had been plucked into the air. What they did find, however, were the tools: pickaxes, shovels, and hammers, standing upright in the soft earth beside the track. Not fallen, not scattered, but placed with deliberate precision, handles pointing skyward like grave markers. And most disturbing of all, as noted in Tanaka's report, later classified by Imperial Command, the tools show no rust or wear. Despite the heavy rain, they appear new, untouched. Vale would later tell Allied interrogators that the Japanese burned the tools where they stood and doubled the guard detail for weeks afterward. 3 days after the disappearance, the Japanese command implemented a brutal work acceleration, as if building faster might outrun the growing unease that had settled over the camp. No official mention was made of the missing transport detail. The prisoners were simply driven harder, their rations cut for inefficiency. Vale noticed the change in the guards first, their usual calculated cruelty replaced by nervous glances toward the jungle, hands tightening on rifle stocks at unexpected sounds. The Thai laborers refused to work beyond sight of the main camp, forfeiting meager rations rather than venture near what they now called the hungry ground. Private Thomas Weller, an Australian artilleryman working the night shift at Hellfire Pass, was the first to see something. Vale witnessed it himself, Weller suddenly freezing mid-swing of his hammer, his face draining of color as he stared beyond the torchlight. "De Vries," he whispered, pointing with a trembling hand, "standing there, watching us." The Japanese guard nearest Vale stiffened, following Weller's gaze into the darkness. For a moment, the guard's disciplined facade cracked, his eyes widening with unmistakable recognition. He barked an order, and two others dragged Weller back to his position, beating him until he resumed work. Vale caught glimpses of the Australian's face throughout the night, tears streaming down his dirt-caked cheeks, lips moving in silent prayer. By morning, Weller was dead in his bunk. The Japanese medic recorded malaria as the cause, but Vale had seen Weller the previous evening. The man had been terrified, not feverish. That same day, a peculiar smell began to permeate sections of the railway, the sickly sweet odor of decay, though no bodies were discovered despite thorough Japanese searches. Lieutenant Tanaka ordered the area doused with lime, a wasteful use of precious supplies that spoke volumes about his concern. Major Harrison documented the growing unease in his hidden diary. August 21st, 1943. Men reporting strange sightings along the track beyond marker 105. Japanese equally disturbed. 3 guards executed one of their own after he claimed to see his dead brother among the missing prisoners. Smell of decay everywhere, though no corpses found. God help us, for the jungle itself seems to have turned against both captor and captive alike. That night, Vale jerked awake from a dreamless sleep, instantly alert. Not a nightmare. Something else had pulled him from sleep. A sound just at the edge of hearing. The rhythmic strike of hammers and picks against stone, coming from the abandoned section of track where the transport detail had vanished. Vale wasn't alone in hearing it. Around him, other prisoners lay awake, eyes open in the darkness. More telling were the Japanese guards, standing rigidly at their posts, faces taut with fear as they stared toward the sound. No one spoke. No one needed to. The sounds continued until dawn, then ceased abruptly as the first light broke through the jungle canopy. Later that morning, a Thai laborer approached Vale cautiously, glancing around to ensure no guards were watching. "New cuts," the man whispered in broken English, pointing toward the abandoned section. "Night work. No men." Vale followed him later during a water break, nearly a kilometer from camp, in an area where no one had been assigned. Fresh tool marks scarred a rock cutting, methodical, machine-like in their precision, too perfect for human hands. At the base of the cutting, Vale found a single military boot print pressed into the mud. The distinctive wear pattern on the sole was unmistakable. It belonged to Corporal de Vries, who had worn mismatched boots since their capture in Singapore. Vale stared at it, ice forming in his veins. The print showed no signs of a foot having lifted again, as if its owner had simply vanished mid-step. There must be a rational explanation, Vale insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. He sat with Major Harrison in the cramped alcove that served as the officers' quarters, both men speaking in whispers. Harrison's once commanding presence had diminished with his body, his frame now skeletal, eyes sunken into dark hollows. "I've been at war since North Africa, Vale. I've seen artillery reduce men to pink mist. I've seen starvation drive soldiers to knife each other over rats." He leaned closer. "But this..." His hand trembled as he gestured toward the jungle. "This isn't war. This is something else." The Japanese command structure was fracturing visibly. Lieutenant Tanaka, once methodical in his brutality, now jumped at shadows. Vale had spotted him consulting with local Thai elders, a stunning display of weakness from an Imperial officer who'd previously treated the locals as subhuman. "The Japanese believe it's a spirit," Harrison said, his voice flat with exhaustion. "Something disturbed by our digging. The Thai have a name for it. Phi Tai Hong. Spirits of violent death." Vale started to object, but Harrison raised a hand. "Save your rational explanations, Sergeant. Tell me how 30 men and 5 guards vanish without a trace. Explain tools that appear pristine after monsoon rains. Explain why men are seeing their dead comrades with eyes that reflect light like animals." Harrison paused. "Explain why you're losing time." Vale's skin went cold. He hadn't told anyone about waking disoriented, his sense of time fractured. "The guard roster," Harrison continued. "3 nights ago, you were noted as absent from your bunk for over an hour. You have no memory of this." Before Vale could answer, shouting erupted outside. Through the thin bamboo walls, they heard Lieutenant Tanaka interrogating someone, a Thai laborer caught trying to flee. "Tell him what you saw," Tanaka demanded, his voice cracking with strain. The translator hesitated before relaying the man's terrified words. "He says dead men work alongside the living at the tunnel excavation. They bleed when cut but feel no pain. They work without stopping, without water. Their eyes..." The translator paused. "Their eyes shine in darkness like jungle cats." Instead of the expected execution for attempted escape, Tanaka dismissed the man with a warning, another deviation from standard procedure. That night, Vale dreamed of digging, clawing through wet earth with bare hands, driven by a compulsion beyond understanding, an urgency that consumed thought itself. He woke standing ankle-deep in mud, nearly a kilometer from camp. His hands were raw, fingernails torn and bleeding. Around him, the jungle held its breath in unnatural stillness. With sickening clarity, Vale realized where he stood, the exact spot where the transport detail had vanished. In the darkness ahead, something moved, a figure silhouetted against the deeper black of the jungle. It stood unnaturally still, then tilted its head at an impossible angle. "Vale." The voice was DeVries, but wrong, hollow, as if speaking through water. "You were supposed to be with us." Vale ran, stumbling through undergrowth, pursued by the sound of multiple footsteps in perfect, mechanical unison. Neither accelerating nor faltering. Relentless. He burst into the camp perimeter, nearly being shot by a startled guard. By morning, fever had claimed him, and for 3 days, Vale drifted between consciousness and delirium. When lucidity returned, Major Harrison sat beside his bamboo pallet, studying a concealed map. "You're not the first," Harrison said without preamble. 3 others have been found outside camp, with no memory of leaving, always in the same area. He marked an X on his map, always where the transport vanished. Vale stared at his bandaged hands. "I was digging, sir. Something wanted me to dig." Harrison's face remained impassive, but fear sharpened his voice. "The question is, Vale, what were you digging for? Or what was using you to dig?" An Australian prisoner in the adjacent bunk leaned over, one who'd been in Japanese hands since Singapore fell. His eyes held the 1,000-yard stare of a man who'd witnessed everything. "The jungle doesn't let go of what it takes," he whispered, "and it's always hungry for more." September 3rd, 1943, monsoon season intensified, turning the railway construction into a quagmire of mud and misery. Lieutenant Tanaka's logbook recorded new protocols with military precision. No prisoner travels alone. No work details smaller than 10 men. All personnel return to camp before sundown. Any night sounds to be ignored. But the unwritten rule revealed their true terror. No Japanese soldier would approach the site of the transport detail's disappearance after dusk. The rain drummed relentlessly on the thatch roof as Vale tried to sleep. Instead, he found himself counting heartbeats, between thunder crashes, anything to distract from the persistent image of De Vries standing in the darkness, head tilted at that impossible angle. A sudden commotion jerked him fully awake. Shouts in Japanese, the clatter of rifle bolts being drawn back. Vale rose, joining other prisoners gathering at the edge of their quarters, squinting through the downpour. A figure stood at the camp perimeter, swaying slightly in the rain. Despite the poor visibility, Vale recognized him instantly. Corporal Bennett, the London baker from the missing transport detail. Only, this wasn't Bennett, as Vale remembered him. Even at this distance, something was fundamentally wrong with his posture. Too still between movements, as if someone had posed a mannequin. His skin appeared waxy, gray even in the dim light cast by the guards' lanterns. 2 Japanese soldiers cautiously approached, rifles raised. Bennett remained motionless until they came within 5 meters. Then, with fluid speed that belied his stiff posture, he lurched toward them. The first guard fired reflexively. The round hit Bennett squarely in the chest. He staggered but didn't fall. The guards retreated in panic as Bennett continued forward. Dark fluid, too dark to be blood, leaked from the wound in his chest. 2 more shots rang out. The second guard's bullet caught Bennett in the head, and he finally collapsed. Lieutenant Tanaka arrived, rain plastering his uniform to his thin frame. He issued rapid orders, his voice cracking with barely controlled panic. 4 guards dragged Bennett's body to the edge of the camp, where they immediately built a pyre, despite the downpour. Vale edged closer, desperate for a glimpse before the flames consumed the evidence. What he saw seared itself into his memory. Bennett's hands were catastrophically damaged, fingers worn to the bone, nails completely gone. The hands of a man who had been digging continuously, without rest, for weeks. Most disturbing was Bennett's eyes, clouded yet somehow reflective, like a jungle predator's. As the flames began to take hold, Vale could have sworn those eyes tracked him specifically, even in death. "They're still working," Vale whispered to Harrison as they returned to their quarters. "The missing men. They're still trying to complete the railway." Harrison nodded grimly. "And they want company." At dawn, Lieutenant Tanaka summoned Vale, the Japanese officers' quarters. Once a model of military order, now showed signs of disarray, maps haphazardly marked, personal items packed as if for quick departure. Tanaka himself looked haggard, his uniform impeccable, but his eyes sunken with exhaustion. "You will take 5 men," Tanaka ordered without preamble. "You will investigate tunnel at kilometer marker 107. Reports say it is expanding on its own." Vale felt ice water replace blood in his veins. "Sir, that's where the transport was heading," Tanaka finished, his voice flat. "I know." The unspoken truth hung between them. The Japanese officer was sending Vale to find whatever had taken the missing men. Not out of courage, but because the alternative, leaving it undisturbed to continue its mysterious work, was somehow worse. As Vale turned to leave, Tanaka spoke again, this time in a whisper. "If you find my men, my soldiers, do not let them return to camp. This is order." The implication chilled Vale to his core. Tanaka believed that whatever had happened to the Allied prisoners had claimed his Japanese guards too, and he feared their return more than their loss. The morning rain had reduced to a fine mist as Vale led his small team toward kilometer marker 107. 2 British engineers, 2 Australian infantry, and a Dutch medic accompanied him, men chosen for their level-headedness rather than physical strength. A single Japanese guard followed at a distance, his rifle clutched tightly, eyes constantly scanning the jungle. "The Japs are more scared than we are," muttered Private Cooper, an Australian infantryman. I've never seen them hang back like this. Vale couldn't disagree. The guard kept at least 20 paces behind them, close enough to shoot any attempted escapees, but far enough to avoid whatever might lurk ahead. As they approached the tunnel entrance, Vale noticed how the jungle fell unnaturally silent. No birds called, no insects chirped. Even the ever-present monsoon frogs had gone quiet. The only sound was the soft dripping of rainwater from leaf to leaf. The tunnel mouth gaped before them, a dark wound in the hillside. According to the Japanese plans Vale had seen, it should have been only 30 meters deep, a project barely begun by the vanished transport detail. Yet the entrance showed signs of extensive work: precisely cut rock, support beams placed at exact intervals, a small drainage channel carved along one side. "Christ," whispered Corporal Fenton, one of the British engineers. This would have taken 100 men weeks to complete. Vale's skin prickled with unease. The report said it was expanding on its own. "That's bloody impossible," Fenton replied, but his voice held no conviction. Vale turned to address the team. "We go in. We document what we find. We leave. No one touches anything they don't have to." The Japanese guard refused to enter, taking position at the mouth of the tunnel. His hands trembled slightly as he lit a cigarette. Inside, the air was cool and dry, despite the humidity outside. Their lanterns revealed walls of cleanly cut stone, far too neat for the hurried construction of the death railway. The tunnel extended straight into the hillside, disappearing into darkness beyond their light's reach. Most disturbing was the floor, unnaturally smooth, as if worn down by countless footsteps, yet the tunnel had supposedly never been used. As they progressed deeper, Vale noted how the construction quality improved rather than deteriorated. The support beams became more precisely placed, the walls more perfectly squared. It was as if the builders had been learning, improving their technique as they worked. "Listen," the Dutch medic, Jansen, whispered suddenly. They froze, extinguishing all but one lantern. In the relative darkness, Vale heard it, a distant scraping sound, rhythmic and mechanical, the sound of metal on stone. "Someone's still digging," Cooper whispered. "How far does this go?" Vale checked his watch. They'd been walking for nearly 15 minutes, far beyond the planned 30 meters of the original tunnel. "We need to see," Vale decided, though every instinct screamed retreat. Another 50 meters brought them to a sharp bend, beyond which the lantern light revealed a large chamber. The scraping sounds grew louder, but as they rounded the corner, they found only empty space, a perfectly circular room with multiple tunnel entrances branching off like spokes from a wheel. The chamber's floor was covered with tools: picks, shovels, hammers, laid out in precise rows. All showed signs of heavy use: worn handles, chipped metal, yet all were placed with military precision. "They were working here," Vale said quietly, "but where are they now?" His question was answered by a sudden silence. The scraping sounds stopped simultaneously, as if a switch had been thrown. Then, from each of the branching tunnels, came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, synchronized. "We need to leave, now," Vale ordered, backing toward their entrance tunnel. Too late. A figure emerged from one of the branches, a man Vale recognized as Private Wilson, the Australian farmer from the transport detail. Behind him came others, moving with the same unnatural precision. Their eyes reflected the lantern light like animals. Their hands were ruined, reduced to raw bone and tattered flesh from endless digging. "Richard," said a voice Vale recognized with horror as DeVries. "You were supposed to be with us. Now you will be—" The Dutch medic broke first, turning to run. He made it 3 steps before Wilson was upon him, moving with impossible speed. The others followed, retreating down the entrance tunnel in panic. Vale ran, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them, not frantic, but methodical, tireless. They reached the final stretch, the tunnel entrance visible as a gray rectangle of daylight. The Japanese guard saw them coming and raised his rifle in confusion, unsure if he should shoot the fleeing prisoners. "Run!" Vale shouted in Japanese. "Hashiru!" The guard's eyes widened as he looked past them. Seeing what followed, he fired 3 quick shots, then turned and fled. Vale burst from the tunnel into the misting rain, his lungs burning. Cooper and 1 British engineer emerged behind him. The others did not. As they collapsed gasping on the muddy ground, Vale looked back. Nothing emerged from the tunnel mouth. The darkness inside seemed absolute, as if the light of day couldn't penetrate beyond the entrance. From within came the sounds of tools on stone, resuming their relentless rhythm. August 15th, 1945, the war ended, not with rescue, but with abandonment. Japanese guards simply disappeared overnight, leaving their prisoners to the mercy of the jungle until Allied forces arrived days later. Sergeant Richard Vale, now a skeletal 98 pounds, his body ravaged by malaria and malnutrition, sat with other survivors as Australian medical officers distributed supplies. Of the 60,000 Allied prisoners who had worked on the railway, nearly 13,000 had perished, victims of starvation, disease, and brutality. But Vale knew the official tallies missed 30 names, men who were neither alive nor properly counted among the dead. "There's something you need to see," Vale told Captain Matthews, an Australian intelligence officer, "before the monsoon washes it away." Matthews recognized the haunted look in Vale's eyes, a look common among the railway survivors, and agreed to accompany him with a small security detail. They traveled by jeep as far as the overgrown track would allow, then continued on foot. Nature had already begun reclaiming the death railway. Vines snaking across rusted rails, wooden ties rotting in the humid air. The Japanese abandoned this section in October 43, Vale explained as they approached kilometer marker 107. Officially, they claimed it was unstable ground. The tunnel entrance had partially collapsed, but remained passable. Matthews ordered 2 men to guard the entrance, while he followed Vale inside with a medic and 2 armed soldiers. Their electric torches revealed what kerosene lanterns had hidden during Vale's previous visit. Intricate wear patterns in the stone walls, as if countless hands had brushed the same spots repeatedly over months of ceaseless work. "How far does this go?" Matthews asked, voice hushed by the oppressive silence. "This tunnel shouldn't exist, not at this length. Not with the manpower they had." Vale didn't answer, pushing forward until they reached a collapse in the tunnel. Without hesitation, he dropped to his knees and began clearing debris. "Help me," he ordered, and after a moment's hesitation, Matthews directed his men to assist. As they dug, the sickly sweet smell of decomposition grew stronger. Beyond the collapse, their torch beams revealed what Vale had feared, a vast chamber where dozens of men lay amid scattered tools. Unlike typical jungle corpses, quickly reduced to skeletons by humidity and insects, these remains were partially preserved in the tunnel's unnaturally dry air. Each man had died at his work, tools still clutched in ruined hands. Some were slumped against walls, others curled around picks and shovels. All were arranged in a perfect circle around the beginning of a vertical shaft descending into darkness. "My God," Matthews whispered. What were they digging for? Vale moved among the dead, naming each one. De Vries, Dutch engineer. He indicated another body. Bennett, baker from London. Then another. Wilson, Australian farmer. As Vale spoke each name, Matthews dutifully recorded it, documenting the final resting place of the vanished transport detail. "But what killed them?" Matthews asked, examining the nearest corpse. "Disease? Starvation?" "Look at their hands," Vale said quietly. Matthews directed his torch beam at the dead man's hands, fingers worn to bone, fingernails completely absent, palms reduced to raw flesh. "They never stopped working," Vale explained. "Not to eat, not to sleep. Something made them continue." Matthews straightened, visibly shaken. "This will be classified. These men died from Japanese brutality, officially." As they prepared to leave, Vale approached De Vries's remains. From the Dutch engineer's pocket, he retrieved a small notebook filled with intricate tunnel drawings. The final page contained a single sentence in De Vries' precise handwriting. "It hungers in the earth beneath us, and we feed it with our labor until we join it." The Australian forces sealed the tunnel with explosives the next day. Official records listed it as a safety measure. No mention was made of what lay within. After repatriation, Vale discovered all Japanese records about that section of the railway had been methodically destroyed before surrender. Lieutenant Tanaka was never found, presumed dead during the Japanese retreat. In 1969, the Thai government began construction of a memorial museum near the former death railway. During excavation near kilometer marker 107, workers reported hearing sounds of tools on stone emanating from deep within the earth. The project was quietly relocated 2 kilometers away. According to local guides, visitors occasionally report seeing gaunt figures working along abandoned stretches of the old railway line at dusk. Their eyes reflect light like animals in darkness. Their hands are always raw, always bleeding. For on the death railway, the clank of tools against stone continues long after the last train has passed. The earth remains hungry, and beneath the jungle floor, the prisoners still serve their sentence of eternal labor. If this tale from the War Maestro's archive has left you with phantom sounds of pickaxes in the night, consider joining our ranks of witnesses. Subscribe to unearth more buried horrors from history's darkest battlefields. Activate the notification bell. You'll want to know when our next classified file is declassified. Share this account with fellow seekers who understand that sometimes the most terrifying entities aren't those we fight against, but those we disturb while following orders. Remember, some railway tracks still await passengers, some tunnels continue to expand, and somewhere in the jungles of Thailand, the digging never ceases.